Welcome to MMA True Fan, a biographical podcast series on legendary mixed martial artists. In this episode on Mark Coleman, hear exclusive interviews with Don Frye, John McCarthy, Wes Sims, Mark Coleman, and more. Please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening.
To me, he's Superman. Like, I would say he could be God up. He was like the toughest dude ever.
There was no back off. There was no quit. There was no ask for any exceptions in Mark Coleman. He was driven all the time to do everything he needed to do to be great at what he was trying to do.
Like a big brother, almost like an uncle. You know what I mean? A second dad. That's what he's been to me. It's a lot to me. I love him. You know, he's one of the most genuine guys. When you're talking about legends of the sport, if you don't mention his name here, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You know what I mean?
MMA True Fan presents Mark Coleman by Rich Donahue and Nate Evans.
UFC 10, a monumental achievement for SEG Sports. Despite pressure from cable companies and Arizona Senator John McCain, the UFC had a hallmark 10th event. McCain, the future presidential candidate, spearheaded a nationwide movement to ban the no-holds-barred event back in UFC 8. He called it human cockfighting. The event was banned throughout most of the country, and Cablevision dropped the pay-per-view rights. Much like the fighters in the cage, SEG would not succumb to pressure. It was another turning point in the history of MMA. However, little did they know, another revolution would take place in the octagon. It was here that SEG made their stand. Ground and pound was invented, and the hammer was born.
For his UFC debut, Mark Coleman was the most accomplished wrestler to grace the octagon. In fields filled with black belts and grandmasters, wrestling was trying to find its place. Dan Severn, a two-time NCAA All-American for Arizona State and Olympic team alternate, opened the door for wrestling in the cage. Mark Coleman blew it open. Mark was born in Fremont, Ohio, on December 20th, 1964. He was a natural athlete and excelled in football and baseball, but wrestling was where he made a name for himself. He always wanted to be a pro athlete. Mark shared with us the lofty goals he set for himself.
When I was 5 years old, I knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the best in the world at wrestling, football, baseball, all three. And I also wanted to be the toughest man in the world. There was no sport, but I still wanted to be that guy because I didn't want nobody to be able to bully me or fuck with me. So I started at 5. I could do 100 push-ups in a row at 5 years of age because my uncle would come over and I would drop down and he'd give me a penny a push-up for how many I could do in a row. So I got it to where I could do 100 and took my dollar bill. And back then that was like $1,000. So, and that's maybe why my daddy took it back at night, because he needed it.
He became St. Joseph High School's first state champion as a sophomore in 1981. Due to an injury, he finished as runner-up as a junior, but finished his senior year with the second state title for the 185-pound weight class. At a young age, Mark understood how to motivate himself.
Starting back in high school, being a state champion, you never forget that as a high school kid. It's so overwhelmingly high feeling. You got to set your goals. You know, you set your distant goals, which was to be an Olympic champion, but you got to set your immediate goals, and becoming a state champion was the first one, and I did achieve that. I was a 2-time state champ, and then after that, I'm going to be a national champ.
He hoped his high school accomplishments would net him a scholarship at a big-time Division I program, like Iowa or Ohio State, but that did not happen.
Coming out of high school, I was going to prove all these guys. I always had something to prove. Always had something to prove. I didn't get recruited. I'm going to prove these coaches they missed the blue chipper, and they did. They missed on me.
Instead, he received offers from Ohio University and Miami of Ohio. Mark chose to begin his collegiate career at Miami. Most people would be happy to receive a scholarship from any Division I program. Mark Coleman wasn't most people.
I knew I wanted out of there because I did not like that place. I didn't like it, and I knew the only way to get out was to get good. And as a junior in college, I took 4th in the country. I was a All-American at Miami, Ohio, Mid-American Conference does not have many All-Americans. I took fourth, and the three guys ahead of me were all seniors. So I'm coming back a year later, ranked number one in the country at Miami of Ohio. But no, I had different plans, and I pretty much could transfer anywhere I wanted to at that point.
With all three finishers graduating, Mark was at the top of the heap and used that clout to transfer to his dream school, The Ohio State University.
That's where I wanted to go as a kid. I dreamed of playing football for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I dreamed of wrestling for the Ohio State Buckeyes, but it wasn't meant to be coming out of high school, but I made it happen. Now, my coach in Miami wasn't too happy about it, but, you know, I said, sorry, my friend, I'm looking down the road, and I'm not going to become no Olympic champion wrestling and then coaching at Miami of Ohio. Now, at Ohio State, I've seen that vision possibly coming together.
OSU was known nationwide for its strong football program, but in the 80s, they experienced some tough strides on the wrestling mat. They finished outside the top 10 at the 86 NCAA tournament and just 7th in the Big Ten. Russ Hellickson, a silver medalist in the 76 Olympic Games, became the head coach for the Buckeyes and immediately began turning the program around. Russ liked what he saw in Coleman.
I think he handled pressure well, and, you know, he was very physical, you know, he had a quick explosiveness. He had an aggressive style of wrestling. You know, when he won the national title, I made the statement to people early in the year that I had a man wrestling boys.
Coach Hellickson knew that in order to compete with programs like Iowa, the Buckeyes needed to work harder than everyone else. Coleman only had 1 year of eligibility left when he entered the program and redshirted his first season. The difference was apparent, and Russ's style impressed Coleman. Mark only started 1 year for the Buckeyes, but he amassed a record-setting 50 wins and became a Big Ten and NCAA champion in 1988. Russ took us back to the national championship tournament.
We just knew he was the guy. I never really sat in the corner in any match and felt that anybody was going to hang with him and beat him. I knew that he had control of everything, you know. Mark was a very aggressive guy. You know, he was very good on his feet, and he had tremendous turns. In almost every match that he wrestled, he'd get a couple takedowns and he'd get a couple turns. It was very unusual for him not to have takedowns in every match and turns in every match. And, you know, I know in the finals, I think he was conservative in the finals because I don't think, because earlier in the year he had beaten Davies pretty bad. And I think he kind of was a little bit conservative in that match. I think he wanted the national title. He saw it, didn't want to make any mistakes. But there was never a time in the match where you felt he wasn't the best guy and he wasn't in control. So I was pretty happy for him. You know, obviously as a new coach at Ohio State, getting your first national champ was important, and Mark was a good guy to have do that.
After graduating, he set his sights on Olympic gold. Coach Hellickson brought Mark on as an assistant coach. This allowed him freedom to train and use OSU's facilities.
I won the 1988 national championship for Ohio State University, and Russ Hellickson hired me the following year, in 1989, as the third assistant on the staff. It was beautiful. It was great. It was like so perfect to me. This is what I wanted to do. I mean, not necessarily coach, but I wanted the freedom to be able to train to be the best in the world. But this gave me that freedom, even though, let me tell you, the pay was not enough to eat ramen noodles.
He worked with the upper weights, and as a coach, helped Kevin Randleman and Rex Holman win championships of their own. Russ shared with us the qualities that made Mark a great coach.
One-on-one, he was very personal with guys. He led by example when he was a college wrestler. He led by example when he was an assistant coach. And, you know, when he was talking to Billy, he believed in what he was telling him because he'd lived it himself. You know, Mark took it all personally. You know, he wanted the individuals that were under his wing to succeed, and he wasn't just taking the paycheck because he was a coach. He was genuinely interested in the well-being of the individuals, and he knew how to reach them. You know, he knew how to interact. He knew how to press their buttons and make them be more competitive and make them train harder. And it was easy on people when he was training with them. He got them to reach their full potential, ask the most of themselves when they're training. So he was a great assistant coach.
Steel sharpens steel. He worked with fellow OSU wrestlers like Randleman, Ray Mendoza, and Nick Nutter and helped them improve. But at the same time, they helped Mark prepare for international competition. Mark knew horsepower was a difference on the wrestling mat.
We're in the weight room, and that's where I excelled. That's where I personally feel that's what turned my guys into champions, is getting them strong.
Mark not only coached Nick Nutter, but eventually became his roommate. One night, he pulled Nick to the side.
He's like, he made this up on the spot. He's like, you could go to parties now, or you could have them thrown for you later. And I'm thinking, that was a good one. And if you really think about it, it's so easy to just be a normal person and roll with the flow, and I don't want to ruffle feathers, and I'm going to go to the party and be like everybody else. But to me, that whole saying, you could go to parties now or have them thrown for you later, suck it up, be abnormal. Don't be a normal person, because normal people aren't remembered. But, suck it up, train hard, and people will throw you parties later. But that was a quote he made up on the spot. That could be a proverb in the Bible.
He never took it easy on anyone. Everything was a competition in Mark.
I mean, when he says Nick never took me down in 10 years, he's pretty serious. He would put $100 bill out in the wrestling room and say, if you get away today, like getting a skate, you get that $100 bill.
Coleman won 3 straight Pan American Championships and a gold medal at the Pan American Games in '91. At the Olympic team trials, he pinned Bill Scheer to become the first OSU graduate to represent the U.S. since 1924. Later that year, he won a silver medal at the FILA World Championships. The pressure to stand on the podium at the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona was immense. Mark's father was always by his side.
My parents, my dad's always there. My dad's always in my corner. My dad was with me always. Never missed a match. He showed up, and we were poor. We were poor growing up, but there he was.
However, Mark finished a disappointing 7th in Barcelona, and he was hitting a crossroads. Mark's focus shifted more on coaching. Wrestling is a yearly grind, especially for international competitors like Mark. When the college scene was in the off-season, the international scene kicked off. This may have been the difference in the 1996 Olympic trials. The grind seemed to burn him out. Mark was defeated in the semifinals in what would be his last wrestling match.
I achieved everything up until that point. State champion, national champion, made the world team, took second in the world, made the Olympic team, and then I took 7th. So left wrestling on a bitter note. And I had 27 years of trying to get that Olympic gold. Yes, it ate me alive. And I didn't respond properly. I didn't train harder. I didn't get bigger, stronger, faster. I actually took time off and, started having some fun, I guess. Although wrestling was fun, started having some fun without getting my heart rate up to 175 or whatever the fuck I did.
Unlike other more popular sports, there isn't much of an endgame for wrestlers. Basketball players have the NBA. Football players have the NFL. These leagues provide a yearly opportunity for fame and financial security. Wrestlers can chase the Olympic dream, but after that, there isn't much else. It's not as if a gold medal in the Olympics gets you a hefty signing bonus either. Former UFC champion Ricco Rodriguez trained with Mark and other world-class wrestlers like Mark Kerr. He holds them in high regard.
You have to give a lot of respect to a lot of these athletes when you really look at an athlete. And I say athlete. I don't say fighter of a world champion. I don't say pro football player, pro baseball player. To me, the most genuine athletic champion in the world is an Olympic athlete. And when you're on an Olympic level, you are truly one of the best athletes in the world. And it doesn't come down to money. It doesn't come down to fame. It comes down to pure heart and dedication to go after something you truly believe. To compete on that level, to understand the dedication and hard work and the hours that an athlete puts in, and they have nothing to show for it at the end of their career. It's sad. It really is sad.
All that changed when SEG Entertainment began the UFC in 1993. Most notably, UFC 4 featured his first true wrestler in the tournament in Dan Severn, who lost in the final to Hoist Gracie. Mark Coleman watched these early events and was immediately hooked. He knew a wrestler could have success in this new arena.
I hit a downspin after the 92 Olympics, and I was down, but that's right when the UFC started, and I caught a glimpse of UFC 1. Not a glimpse. I watched the whole thing, and I sat there, and everything just lit up in me, and I said that I just really hoped it was real. I couldn't believe this was really going to happen, because what I saw was just me. That's my octagon. I can take you, Hoist Gracie. I can take you, Ken Shamrock. I can beat these guys watching it with my wrestling buddies, and that's what I'm going to do. I got to find a way to get in there. It was Richard Hamilton. I don't even like using his name because we separated on bad terms, but he did get me into the UFC. Richard Hamilton did. Pretty sneaky guy, but he had got Severn in there, and then he got Frye in there, but both those guys left him. Why'd they leave him? There was a reason. Well, I needed him, and he offered me a spot in UFC 10, and he was looking at Kerr and Erickson at the same time, right after the Olympic trials. Right after all three of us lost, we're not going to make the Olympic team. Richard Hamilton came in with a contract. He took me in one room. I told him, look, I will beat Mark Kerr's ass. I'll beat Tom Erickson's ass. I mean, no disrespect to these guys. This is just the way I felt. And I said, I will beat Don Frye's ass. I did watch UFC 9, and I'll beat his ass. I said, I'm the man for the job, Richard Hamilton. And, I talked my way into it. I said, let me see that contract. I said, I'm not even going to read it. I said, just where do I sign, dude? Oh, you don't need your attorneys to go look at it? Which, of course, I probably should have. But if I would have did that, guess what? I might have lost out on my opportunity, because the fight was in like 35 days. You know, I had 35 days, walk off the wrestling mat, walk in that cage.
UFC 10, the tournament, was held at the Fairgrounds Arena in Birmingham, Alabama, on July 12, 1996. Unlike Severn, Mark Coleman basically just stepped off the mats months prior and was stepping into the cage for the first time. Although fans were anticipating a Frye vs. Goodridge rematch, Coleman's chiseled physique and world-class resume cast a large shadow over the field. His first opponent was Moti Horenstein, a former Israeli commando and Krav Maga practitioner with championships in karate. Nick Nutter was in Mark's corner.
I always grew up as a wrestler thinking like, oh, you're just a wrestler, you don't know karate and whatnot. And every town in America has the sensei who has a death touch that will kill you with one, To me, I was thinking, Coleman, you're in trouble, because you're fighting this guy, Moti Horenstein, and he is a 4th-degree black belt. Listen, you're just a dumbass wrestler. You don't know these secret death touches. You're going to get killed. Part of me in my back of my head is thinking you're going to get murdered. You're just a dumb wrestler. But, man, after that night, Moti Horenstein, he took him down. And
despite his bare-knuckle military experience, he could not stop Mark's takedown attempt. He quickly mounted Moti, and Coleman put the MMA world on notice.
To hear the thuds of him hitting him in the head, it was surreal to just hear a fist really hit a head. And I was, 7 feet away. It was, oh my God, he smoked Moti Horenstein.
The hammer had arrived. Unlike other ground fighters, Mark wasn't trying to submit Moti. He delivered massive strikes that echoed throughout the arena. This was ground and pound. Big John McCarthy was the third man in the octagon that night.
At the time, Mark, although Mark didn't really understand mixed martial arts completely, his wrestling was so incredible. He was so physically strong. And, when he would make space to punch, and that's why he's called the godfather of ground and pound, he would come down with his stinking hammer fist it was crushing at times.
Moti tried to tie up Coleman's arms to stop the punishment, but that didn't matter. Mark's hands were tied up, but he still had Olympic-class top control, and premiered a signature of the hammer in those days, the headbutt. This was no holds barred after all, and the hammer took advantage. The headbutts opened up Horenstein, and with a final barrage of punches, Mark finished off his opponent in 2 minutes and 43 seconds.
And Moti Horenstein, he took more than I thought a person could take, and I thought it was because the gloves were in the way. I went back and I told Hamilton, I said, hey, I'm taking these fucking gloves off, man. They're getting in the way. And he pleaded with me not to take them off. Please wear them. You got to protect your hands. I'm like, oh, geez, Thank God I did, because if I would have took the gloves off, I would have broke my hand probably on Big Daddy Goodrich's head.
Gary, Big Daddy Goodrich, was his opponent for the semifinal. Goodrich, a former amateur boxer and arm wrestling champion, had competed in the last 2 UFCs. He made his debut at UFC 8, decimating Paul Herrera from a crucifix position in 13 seconds. Big Daddy was only 2 inches taller than Mark, but seemed to tower over him. He weighed in at 263 pounds and looked every bit of it in his black gi.
Goodrich pressured Coleman at the start, but was quickly double-legged to the floor. He unleashed devastating headbutts from Gary's guard. Nick was cage side.
Back then, headbutts were allowed. Coleman had him, and he started headbutting him, and Gary looked at him and smiled and opened his mouth like, go ahead and headbutt me, and you're going to headbutt my teeth. And Coleman's like, Jesus, this guy's crazy.
Eventually, Goodrich managed to get up, but Mark had control of his back and blasted him with peekaboo uppercuts. This was a tougher fight, taking 7 minutes, but it was another dominating win for the Hammer. Coleman was showing some fatigue in this fight, but he had one more hill to climb.
In the finals, he faced Don the Predator Frye, looking like a buff version of Tom Selleck. Frye won UFC 8, with the skills he learned on the mats for Arizona State, coupled with his pro boxing experience. He was a formidable opponent, with a more balanced skill set than most fighters in those days. However, it was here that Frye would demonstrate his greatest attribute: toughness.
What followed was one of the most iconic matches in MMA history. Mark Coleman pushed Don Frye to limits few have seen in combat sports. Mark established top control early and proceeded to rain down heavy punches. Blood streamed down Don's face.
Don Frye from his back, I stopped and took a look at him about the 7-minute mark, whatever. I stopped and took a look at him, and all of a sudden, he threw a fucking right-hand jab from his back, and he basically said, yeah, I'm still fucking fighting, Coleman. And he popped me, and I'm like, son of a bitch. Then I started to unleash on him again.
Mark unleashed big knees, elbows, and punches. Don kept working, though, and found ways to keep Coleman moving. Frye would find opportunities to stand up, only to be taken down again. Coleman kept hitting him with hammer fists and hooks to the head. It was an utter destruction. Big John McCarthy took a hard look at the fighters.
I looked and I said, Don can't win this. But being that Don had won the tournament and was the guy from UFC 8 and then had won a single fight and now was coming back to win this tournament again, it was a position where I couldn't just stop the fight on him. You had to let him go a long ways because people understood how tough he was and everything. And so, some guys you've got to let go, and you got to, prove to people, hey, there was no way that he could win that fight, especially against who he was fighting.
The Hammer continued the assault. I couldn't believe it wasn't over yet.
I thought I was really worried out there that I was going to really hurt a man like forever, and I didn't like that feeling at all. I mean, I'm being real here. At about the 10.5-minute mark, Don Frye, I realized this man was never going to quit. Because Don Frye at the 11-minute mark, he was still feisty. Big John looked at him at about the 8-minute mark and asked him if he was okay. And I didn't think he was going to respond, but he pulled his eyes open and he looked at John and said, I'm fine. And when he said, I'm fine, my mind said, oh my God, what do I got to do? What do I have to do to this man? And I just kept going. And slowly but surely his hands were dropping. And then all of a sudden I hit him with what I thought for sure should end this fight. And I paused and I was looking at John out of the corner of my eye and he didn't move. And that's when I said, what the heck? Am I going to have to kill this man?
McCarthy paused the action so the doctor could take a look at Don.
Don's getting thumped on it, and I got him up at a certain point, and brought him over to the doctor, and I said, hey, do you want to continue on? And he said, yeah, I'm good, right? And I said, you need to show me something or I'm going to stop the fight. I'm not going to let you get beat to death. Because Don was that tough, he would let that happen.
The bout resumed, and Nick Nutter was getting worried.
What started to scare me about that fight was like, this guy, he's not going to quit. And how do you end it? So obviously Coleman had to finish the fight, and the way that Don Frye was fighting, I'm like, this guy will die before he quits. So what's going to happen? And by the grace of God, Big John McCarthy ended up calling mercy on Don Frye. But man, Don Frye is crazy because he would have died, honestly, before he tapped.
Finally, as Coleman was unleashing elbows from side mount, Big John McCarthy called a stop to the bout. McCarthy needed to save Don from himself, as it was clear he would not submit. Mark had done it. He was the UFC 10 champion.
Wow, man, this is what I dreamed of since I was a 5-year-old boy. I did declare myself a world champion. I didn't get a world title in wrestling, but I'm a world champion right now in this new sport of UFC. How much better can life get at that point? Wow. But all of a sudden, and I was looking at my hands, I took my gloves off, and it was hurting when they took the gloves off. My hands were hurting. They were so sore. And I'm looking at them just making a fist saying, man, I love my fists. I love my hands. They hurt so bad. They were so swelled up. It took a month for all the swelling to go down in my hands because, that's how many times I hit people that night. And it's a very, very good problem to have after a fight when your hand hurts and nothing else does.
Don Frye looked back on that night and saw the positives.
Coleman beat the hell out of me, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me realize, I was tougher than what I thought I was. I impressed myself, and I ended up getting more fans from that fight than any other fights.
Mark's attack was so vicious, Frye broke his occipital, which is a structure that makes up the back of your skull. Frye had said that he needed to exorcise some demons, and this fight allowed him to do it. The classic rivalry began in the cage in Birmingham. As a wrestler, Mark Coleman accomplished quite a bit in his career. Outside of an Olympic medal, he met every goal he set out to accomplish. Despite all of that, Mark could still come home and be Mark. Now, as a UFC champion, things were different.
Well, you go from a wrestler, Olympic wrestler in America, these things mean nothing. You go from that to becoming the UFC 10 champion. Holy shit, as a wrestler, you cannot believe. First, as a wrestler, you're excited about being the champion. But then second, as a wrestler who we never really got anything except victory. That was our award. But when you win the UFC, all of a sudden they strap a big belt around my waist, they hand me a check, and I'm not going to jail. I just beat 3 dudes up in one night, and I'm not going to jail. This is the coolest thing ever.
Everyone wanted a piece of the champ. After his UFC 10 tournament win, he received a call from a representative from the Universal Vale Tudo Fighting Organization.
A guy from Brazil calls me up and says, hey, Coleman, we want to bring you to Brazil, and we want to give you a little appearance fee and pay for your trip. And as a wrestler, it was just, honestly, it just blew my mind. I was like, what? I said, hell yeah. Everything paid for. That was great. But then all of a sudden they said, hey, Mr. Coleman, do you have any fighters, because the Hammer House hadn't been named yet, but they said, do you have any fighters? I said, yes, I have a lot of fighters. But really, I didn't have no fighters. But I did. I knew a lot of my buddies.
The first person he called was Kevin Randleman. He hadn't talked to his friend in about a year since he left Ohio State, but he had a feeling he was down to get into this business. It didn't take much convincing. Kevin had 30 days to get ready, so Kevin drove to Columbus and moved in with Mark to train. This was how the famed Hammer House was built.
The Hammer didn't have to wait long to defend his tournament championship. UFC 11 took place 2 months later at Fair Park Arena in Augusta, Georgia. UFC 11, the proving ground, was light work for Coleman. He defeated Julian Sanchez by submission in 45 seconds. Then in the semifinals, a quick double leg and headbutts dispatched Brian Johnston in 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
he wasn't ready to take the Don Frye ass whooping. That's the difference between him and Don Frye. Don Frye, you're going to have to kill him. Brian Johnston, I hit him with some good punches. Then I hit him with about 3 or 4 headbutts. And basically, he was overpowered. When I got on top of him, he didn't have nothing for me.
Unfortunately, there would be no final match.
Nobody fought me in the finals. There was nobody that wanted to fight me because I was really on top of my game by UFC 11 finals. I would have destroyed Tank. I would have destroyed Frozo. They were destroyed. They offered Tank to fight, and he told him, "Fuck you." You know, he just took 60 knees from Big Scott Frozo. I was sitting in the background licking my chops, saying, "I'm gonna kill either one of these guys." You know, Frozo went to the hospital, and Tank told him no way. They went and asked the alternate, and the alternate said he broke his hand. It was a young Brazilian guy who I'm pretty sure just decided he didn't want in the cage with me that night. They kept coming and telling me who I'm going to fight. They kept changing it, and I'm getting a little irritated, man. I want to know who the fuck am I fighting in the finals. And then they came back and said Don Frye. I said, Don Frye? I go, what the fuck you mean, Don Frye? He was sitting in the front row watching. I said, I can imagine Don Frye does want to fight me right now. He's probably got a beer in his hand, and he's got that kind of gut. That's why I'm saying I call him the toughest man ever. That fucker was ready to fight me. He'd come back there, warm up, and step in that cage, even if he had a few beers in him. But I said okay to it. But then they came back later and said they must have decided it wouldn't have been too smart for the organization or the company to put somebody in there who just got pulled off the front row. You know what I mean? So then they looked at me and said, "You win. You know, you win." And I'm like, wow, it was kind of cool, but it was kind of empty.
The UFC Super Fight Championship was introduced at UFC 5. It was an open-weight title designed to designate a reigning UFC champion a UFC tournament winner could challenge. The super fight concept was successful for the UFC, but as the sport developed, SEG realized they needed to conform to more traditional combat sports concepts in order to be accepted. They had to start establishing weight classes and abolish the super fight title.
At UFC 12, the reigning tournament champion Mark Coleman would take on the reigning super fight champion Dan Severn for the inaugural unified heavyweight title. It was a matchup ripped straight from a comic book. The Hammer versus the Beast. Both men were masters in wrestling and plied their trade with savage results. Both men were 2-time tournament winners. Dan was 6 years older, but 20 pounds heavier. Pundits thought Dan had the edge in grappling ability, but Mark clearly had more power.
Youth and power were the difference. Mark achieved mount quickly and wrenched Dan's head into his midsection. This wasn't some BJJ black magic. This was Mark Coleman's brand of MMA. There was no setup. He didn't catch. He took and became the UFC's first heavyweight champion via scarfold choke in 2 minutes, 57 seconds.
After the win, Mark was riding high. His first title defense was against Maurice Smith at UFC 14 on July 27, 1997. Maurice was a heavy underdog in this fight. Although he was making his UFC debut, he was more than qualified to challenge for the title. Mo Smith was a multiple-time kickboxing champion and an MMA champion, having held the heavyweight title for Extreme Fighting. Up until this point, no true striker had any real success in the octagon. The Hammer's power wrestling style looked unbeatable. But Mo had a few tricks up his sleeve. In his corner, he had Frank Shamrock. During his stint in the Pancras organization, Mo and Frank became friends and training partners. They worked extensively together, with Mo helping Frank improve his striking game, and Frank helping to improve his groundwork.
This cross-training, along with a great strategy, was the key to this fight. Over the course of 21 minutes of action, Mo kept Mark away with body and leg kicks. Mark would hit takedowns, but Mo weathered the storm, utilizing a butterfly guard from bottom. Mo's powerful legs kept Coleman moving from the top. He elevated him and kept his head moving. He made Mark work, and eventually, the pace took its toll. With 35 seconds left in regulation, Mark was exhausted. Smith reversed his position and scored from his feet. In overtime, Maurice took over and won by unanimous decision. This was the biggest upset in UFC history up until this point, and it sent shockwaves throughout the worldwide community.
Coleman took nearly a year to come back, recovering from ACL surgery. It was during this time that he also had his first daughter, Mackenzie. He was originally scheduled to face Randy Couture at UFC 17, but Randy had to withdraw due to injury. Pete Williams stepped in on short notice. Pete was a striker by trade, and trained with Ken Shamrock's Lions Den team. UFC 17 was named Redemption, but unfortunately Mark did not find it against the young Williams. Taking a page from Maurice Smith, Pete wore Mark down and in overtime crushed him with a devastating head kick. This was Mark's second loss in a row, and the first time he'd ever been finished.
My confidence is way down. 2 losses in a row. A knockout to Pete Williams. I found out what was wrong with me. I found out my thyroid was fucking shot, and I got put on some medication, and your thyroid controls a lot. And I didn't know what was wrong with me after the Williams fight. I just had no energy. I'm looking up at the sun, just saying, damn, man, it ended. You're old. I'm 33 years old, and I thought I was just overdone. And then finally I got some blood work done with the doctor, and, he found out my thyroid was really not working. And my mom has thyroid issues. It's very hereditary. My mom's got a hypothyroid. And so anyways, he just put me on thyroid medication, and it felt like my engine kicked back on. My engine did kick back on, and I was like, back. I'm back. Mark Coleman's not done. And I got ready for Pedro Hizo.
Riding a 2-fight losing streak, and on the last fight of his contract, this was one of the biggest fights of Mark's career. The Hammer was a world-class athlete, with his back against the wall. This was a match for survival.
Pedro Hizo was a skilled Brazilian kickboxer who trained with former UFC champion Marco Ruas. His signature was a devastating leg kick, and he peppered Mark with it throughout the bout, leaving him with a nasty foot-long purple welt on his thigh. Mark's preparation paid off, however, as he controlled most of the regulation time on top, working his ground and pound. Unlike his previous overtime performances, Mark had a much better gas tank. He kept moving, circling Hizo, and even counter-kicking him.
I was out there just trying to squeak by, and usually I'm out there trying to finish a man, and I left it in the judge's hands, and it was controversial.
It was a tough, close fight, but Hizo was awarded the split decision victory. This result continues to be debated in the MMA community, much like Hammer's friend and training partner Kevin Randleman's loss to Bas Rutten.
Following this loss, Mark was released from the UFC.
And the next thing you know, I went from the champion to the fucking chump. And, my mind was, what am I going to do now? What the hell am I going to do after the Hizzle fight? And then luckily, Frye picked me up. They brought me into their organization, and I took advantage of what they offered.
He accepted a contract to fight for Pride Fighting Championships in Japan for a fight later that same year. With a big budget, huge crowds, and a television deal, Pride was the biggest promotion on the planet. Ricco Rodriguez competed there as well, and shared his thoughts on the legendary organization.
The thing is, Pride it was a different element. You have to remember, we were fighting in Pride when we were fighting, in the Tokyo Dome for 100,000 people. I don't think people ever understand that. The UFC is gargantuous today, but it will never be in any way, shape, or form the size it was of Pride. And I'm not talking about pay-per-views. I'm not talking about exposure. I'm talking about the elegance of grace. You had 100,000 people sitting in an arena, and they only screamed and cheered when something exciting happens. It was like watching golf or watching, a tennis match, or, where the excitement and the applause happen when something happens. And when, unless you've experienced something on that demeanor, seeing 100,000 people in there in complete silence, and you got 2 guys screaming on the cornerman, and they were the loudest people. But the reality is that it was like watching gladiators or samurais fighting, and then the applause were the action that happened. And not only that, they knew what they were watching. They were educated. They were very well aware of what it took to be an athlete at that type of level.
His first match in Japan was at Pride 5 in April of 1999. His opponent was Nobuhiko Takada, a popular professional wrestler turned mixed martial artist. Takada was part of the shoot-style movement in Japanese pro wrestling. In short, shoot-style matches were designed to look more realistic than your standard American WWE affair. The outcomes and storylines were still predetermined, but the matches resembled more of an MMA match. Takada was a major reason Pride became popular so quickly in Japan. He lost the main event in Pride 1 to Hickson Gracie by armbar. It was an extension of a long rivalry between Gracie and Japanese pro wrestlers, and although the match didn't go well for Takada, the hype made the bout extremely lucrative, ensuring more Pride events in the future.
In the early days of Pride, Takada's popularity helped stir the drink. In a way, Pride was created to showcase Takada. But with 2 losses to Hicks and Gracie, Takada needed a high-profile win to keep in good standing with the Japanese fans. He found it against Coleman, who he submitted via heel hook in round 2. This win seemed very suspect to MMA fans. Coleman was a world-class athlete and former UFC champion. Takada was a pro wrestler with 3 MMA fights to his credit. Mark told us about the contract negotiations.
I thought they were offering me a real fight, $300,000, and it was 30,000. It was 300,000 yen, which was $30,000. I said, "What the fuck? No, man, I'm not doing it for that." But then they went up high enough where I just said, "Fuck it," you know. I said, "You guys got to promise me another fight after it, because I'm not done fighting."
His next opponent was Ricardo the Mutant Moraes, a 6'8", 270-pound Brazilian monster, under the tutelage of Renzo Gracie. Now on a 4-fight losing streak, Mark knew a loss could be his last. Perhaps Pride wanted to push the Brazilian with a win over the former UFC champ. He went to work back home in Ohio, bringing in additional training partners, like the 6'10" Wes Sims. The bout was 2 10-minute rounds, and Mark's conditioning held up. It was a conservative strategy, but he didn't want to risk gassing out like his previous fights. He hit takedown after takedown, impressively ground and pounding Moraes for a huge win. Mark Coleman was back at the winner's circle.
As a reward, Coleman was invited to participate in Pride's first tournament, the Pride Grand Prix 2000. Pride wanted to celebrate the new millennium by hosting the greatest openweight tournament of all time. The field was impressive, featuring legends such as Royce Gracie, Kazushi Sakuraba, Gary Goodrich, Igor Vovchanchin, and Mark Kerr. The 16-man tournament first held an opening round on January 30th, 2000. The 8 winners would all face off at the Grand Prix finals on May 1st, 2000. In order to be crowned champion, you must defeat 3 opponents in one night. In order to prepare for this event, he started to work with Pat Miletich, the UFC welterweight champion at the time. Mark's opening round opponent was Masaki Satake, a charismatic kickboxer and former champion. Although he had some shoot-style experience fighting in rings, he essentially made his MMA debut against Mark. The hammer took him down easily and finished him with a neck crank in 1 minute 14 seconds.
40,000 people crammed in the Tokyo Dome to witness the biggest event in MMA, possibly ever, the Grand Prix Finals. Each fight would be 2 rounds, the first being 10 minutes and the second 5. Mark won his first match against Akira Shoji by unanimous decision in workmanlike fashion. In the semifinals, Coleman faced Kazuyuki Ironhead Fujita. Strangely, this match became the quickest win in Pride FC history. Fujita came into the ring visibly in pain, with his left knee now wrapped up. It was clear that his upset win over Mark Kerr took its toll. As soon as the match began, Fujita's corner threw in the towel, concerned for his health. And with that, Mark Coleman was in the finals. His opponent was the Ukrainian power puncher, Igor Ice Cold Vovchanchin.
Vovchanchin was undefeated in Pride, with scintillating knockout wins to his credit. That night, he defeated Gary Goodrich by TKO and Sakuraba by corner stoppage. Mark was very familiar with Igor, having cornered Mark Kerr in their match 6 months prior. What really stood out for Mark was Igor's hands.
Vovchanchin's in my back room, and he's shaking my hand, and I feel his hand. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. I see why he killed people with that right hand. My hand was maybe longer, but his hand was just like a big, thick fucking, it was twice as thick as mine. I'm like, oh my God.
The final match would have no judges. After the first 10-minute round, subsequent 5-minute rounds would continue until a winner was determined.
Well, the night before the fight, they changed it from a 20-minute time limit to a no time limit, and I honestly didn't have any clue how I was going to finish Igor Vovchanchin off, because I know the man can fight for 2 hours if he has to, and I didn't visualize any finish in sight.
Mark wasted no time in the opening round, taking the dangerous striker to the ground with a single leg. Mark was a more mature fighter since his UFC run, showing a more relaxed demeanor and patience. He blasted Igor with body shots throughout the first round, never allowing Igor to escape and stand up. At the start of round 2, the fighters began on their feet, where Igor was most dangerous. Mark quickly took Igor down again, and with about 2 minutes to go, shucked Igor's legs away and improved his position to north-south.
So I just didn't know how I was going to finish this guy, but then all of a sudden I seen the opportunity I had him stuck in the corner on his back, but I wanted to get him stuffed into the corner so he couldn't belly down. And I still think he should have found a way to try to belly down, but for some reason he blocked the kicks with his hands, and holy shit, man! I think it was 17 times. I think I counted 17 of them the other day. And he was not knocked out, but I think he just realized that this was no place to go. And when I felt the referee tap me on the shoulders, my goodness, man, there's no explaining how I felt at that point. I was out of my mind. I could not believe I just won this tournament. It was such a big tournament, and nobody gave me a chance. My emotions were very apparent when you see my celebration. I was overwhelmed, and I damn near did a flip and landed on my head. I was so out of my mind.
Mark jumped up with his hands in the air and ran around the ring, finally leaping into the crowd to embrace his fans. He was handed an absurdly large trophy, a championship belt, and a prop check for his prize, $200,000.
There it was. Mark Coleman was back. I was the world champion a couple years earlier. It was taken away from me. And when I won the Prix Grand Prix, people were giving me the number one ranked status. So basically, yes, I won the world titles in the UFC, and then the Prix Grand Prix. I considered that for the world title. I was considered a world champion at the time once again. And wow, yes, that was amazing and overwhelming.
With that win, he became one of two men to win a UFC and Pride tournament in their career. Mark the Hammer Coleman was on top of the MMA world again. He won the biggest tournament in history and was the number one heavyweight in the world. 2000 was a big year for Mark outside the cage as well, as he welcomed his second daughter, Morgan, to the world.
Mark was very popular with Japanese fans and started to do commercials. Advertising in Japan can get pretty wacky, as Mark explains.
I did a Dole Banana commercial, which was crazy. You can find pictures of that all over. I mean, they're hard to come by, but you can find pictures of me sitting on like a 7-foot banana with this. I had this costume on. They had a king's crown. I had my shoes. My shoes were yellow and they curled up in the air like a banana. And then I had these pants that only came down to my knees, and they were pink, red, purple stripe. It was just really, really. Then I had they turned me into the king. I was the king of Banana Land. So I had all this king's costume on, and I had to sit there, and I had to hold these two bananas. It was Dole Banana. They were doing they had a special banana. It was bigger. It was more yellow. It had more nutrients in it, and it was more sweet. So, Sweetie Obama Uma, Sweetie Obama. I'm telling my people I'm the king of Banana Land, so I'm up there in this costume holding these bananas up, and I got to scream out, Bana Uma, Sweetie Obana Uma. And then I had to open a banana, take a bite of it, and I had to do about 7 or 8 different endings to it. One time I would slip on a banana peel, a lot of editing and this and that, but it was so cool. I got paid $20 fucking grand. I got my mom and dad first class business trip over to Japan for 7 days. I got them a vacation paid for, and I shot this commercial.
He went on a game show where contestants were picked on the street to do stunts for prizes. For this particular episode, the contestants had to survive Mark trying to rip their pants off for 5 minutes. If they did, they would receive $50,000. No one received prize money that day. In December of 2000, he started professional wrestling. His first match was at Inoki Bumbaye 2000, where he teamed with Mark Kerr and defeated a team of Takahashi Isuka and Yuji Nagata. For the next 10 years, Mark would moonlight as a professional wrestler, weaving bouts between his MMA matches.
Mark returned to Pride on March 25, 2001, at Pride 13. He took on Alan Goes, a lanky Brazilian with a black belt in jiu-jitsu under Carlson Gracie. Mark continued to train with Miletich fighting systems leading up to this fight. He came in notably leaner, his lowest weight up until this point. Initially, Goes threw some wild capoeira-style kicks, missing Coleman. Goes was baiting him to take him down. Coleman did, and despite some concern from Pride commentator Stephen Quadros, did not stand back up. Coleman went full hammer, delivering punishing body shots to the crowd's delight. He finished Allen with devastating knees from the front headlock position, knocking him out clean in 1 minute 13 seconds. He was so out, in fact, Allen awoke and immediately began attacking and celebrating Coleman's legs.
On top of his own professional career, the Hammer House became a top MMA team in the world. Mark and Kevin were the foundation, but the rest of the team grew and had success in their own right. Mark Kerr, Wes Sims, Branden Lee Hinkle, Nick Nutter, Royce Alger, and Phil Baroni all had success under the Team Hammer House banner. Just like when he was assistant at OSU, Mark took coaching personally.
Oh, he's the best. He's the most motivating guy. He's just
Branden Lee Hinkle.
Oh, it's a lot of banging heads, man. You know what I mean? It's a lot of motivation, and it's a lot of mental toughness. I was telling everyone, a lot of times it's like the hammer one. Hey, what are we gonna do today? Whatever you don't want to do today, just to make you tougher. You know what I mean?
It was simple at the Hammer House. Wes Sims explains.
I mean, you come in, it was a fight, and as soon as Mark would say, let's start out 60%, let's start out at 80%, and it was only a minute before everybody was going up hundreds.
There wasn't anything fancy about it.
I look at people now, and
Nick Nutter.
They would laugh at what we did. Everybody's got a nutritionist. They got a Muay Thai coach. They got a boxing coach. They got a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They have a wrestling coach. Like, back then, we just said, let's just train. Let's wrestle. Let's get tired. Whoever wants to come up, you want to show some cool stuff, fine. If not, we're just going to wrestle, ground and pound, and kick ass.
Mark put it into perspective.
And the Hammer House left its name. We went into enemy territory, and we continue to go into enemy territory many, many times. We were a nice team. A lot of countries, a lot of cities, a lot of states, a lot of promotions. They always like to bring the Hammer House guys into their territory because we were good bad guys. We were good at playing the bad guy role, and they loved bringing us in. And most likely they would like our guys to lose, but a lot of times they didn't find that too easy to do. So the Hammer House was special to me.
Mark was on a 6-fight win streak and was matched against another jiu-jitsu ace in Antonio Rodrigo Minotauro Nogueira. Nogueira was a big signing for Pride, having come off winning the 32-man rings King of Kings tournament in 2000. After his successful debut against Gary Goodrich at Pride 15, he was slated to face Mark a month later. Mark was stubborn when it came to his technique and fight strategy. From the beginning, he knew his power and wrestling prowess could beat anyone. It didn't matter if you were a striking champion, jiu-jitsu black belt, or an All-American in wrestling. In Mark's mind, he was going to take you to the ground and beat you up. He knew the challenge ahead of him, but he could not prepare as well as he should have. His mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer, which forced him to stay home and train himself. His plan was to go out west to train with Josh Barnett to work on submission defense, but that understandably had to be scrapped.
Rodrigo had a great chin and took pride in his boxing technique. He didn't worry about being taken down, which allowed him to throw striking techniques at full power. Nogueira saw his Brazilian top team teammate, Alan Goes, make the mistake of trying to shoot for a takedown against the Olympian, which was the beginning of the end. Instead, Rodrigo pressured Coleman from the stand-up position, punching his way into a standing clinch. Rodrigo would either finish Mark standing or force him to take him down. After Rodrigo missed with a head kick and slipped, Mark followed him to the ground. Already showing fatigue, Mark was in Minotauro's guard.
Oh, I didn't like it at all from the second we landed on the ground. His hands were like it was the strongest grip I've ever felt. So he locked up my wrist with his hands, or whatever he wanted to lock up. His hands were so strong, and then his knowledge of jiu-jitsu. I felt like a stupid wrestler on top of this guy. And to be quite honest with you, I wasn't in my best shape.
Rodrigo attacked with submissions immediately. He kept a very active guard, frustrating Coleman. Mark tried to improve his position, but Minotauro sunk in a deep triangle choke. Mark tried to slip out, but Rodrigo adjusted his grip, finishing Coleman with an armbar at 6 minutes 10 seconds in the first round. After taking a little time off to focus on his family, Coleman was slated to rematch Don Frye at Prix 21. Frye, who returned to MMA on the same card as Coleman vs. Nogueira, had won 3 fights in a row. After having defeated Ken Shamrock in a grudge match at Pride 19, Bad Blood, he set his sights on his longtime rival. With less than a month to go before the bout, Coleman, while training with his longtime friend Kevin Randleman, was dropped on his head accidentally. He laid motionless on the mat, with no feeling in his body. He was rushed to the hospital. He recovered, but the fight had to be scrapped.
It wasn't until Pride 26, nearly 2 years away from competition, that Mark finally faced Don Frye. The Predator was nearly fanatical in his pursuit of a rematch, as Mark explains.
We talk a lot, but he said he tells in interviews how that just destroyed his life for over a year. You know, he just watched that fight every day. He said for a year.
It took 2 to 4 years of his life, 2 physically and 2 mentally. Because he hated my guts. Don Frye hated my fucking guts after that fight. We would see each other at small fights where he had somebody he knew there, and I would be there with one of my guys and backstage hanging out, and, you know, I'd just give him a little wave, and he just would look at me and he would wave back, but, man, he just didn't. He just hated me.
Don started training with Frank Shamrock in preparation for the bout. Frank was instrumental years ago in helping Maurice Smith defeat Mark, and he was looking for an edge. Once again, Mark's back was against the wall. It was a long road back to the ring, and he faced a hungry, formidable opponent.
The pressure was on, and in order to have a future in the sport, Mark had to win. He brought his lunch pail to work, and proceeded to methodically take Don down and hold him in superior positions. At the end of regulation, Mark was awarded a unanimous decision victory. Mark will be the first to admit this wasn't the most exciting fight, but he had to play safe and conservative to ensure the win. Mark and Don are now great friends.
And, me and Don Frye right now are, I consider him a best friend. You know, Don Frye is the toughest man I ever fought, as far as just toughness.
In 2004, Pride held its first heavyweight Grand Prix. The winner would receive the heavyweight title, as the reigning champion Fedor Emelianenko was in the field as the number 1 seed. Mark was invited to the event and took on Fedor in the opening round. Despite taking the stoic Russian down early, he simply couldn't hold Fedor down and was finished via armbar in 2 minutes 11 seconds. In early 2005, Mark fought the Croatian striking ace Mirko Krokop at Pride 29. He was offered the fight with only 3 weeks' notice.
And then all of a sudden Pride calls me and says, "Will you fight Krokop?" I said, "Hell no." You know, I never said no to a fight, but this is one of the first fights I can remember saying no. I said, "I'm not fighting Krokop in 3 weeks. Are you serious?" They're like, "Oh, Coleman, come on, we need you. We need you to fight this guy. We have nobody else. It's somebody got hurt." Nope. I'm not getting my neck fucking, my neck was jacked at the time. It was either just before surgery or just after surgery. Either way, it was still a scary thought fighting Krokop, the savage killer that I admit that he is. I would love to fight him with a full tank of gas. I think I beat him with a full tank of gas, but I know coming over there with 3 weeks is nothing. So then they offer me a little more money, and I say no. Still, I say no, but I wanted to say yes, but I said no. And then they offer me a little bit more money, and I say no, but I say it a lot more quietly. And then they say, "This is the last offer, Coleman. Take it or leave it." And then I sell myself to the devil, and I take it, knowing good and well I'm in big fucking trouble.
Unfortunately, he suffered his second KO loss of his career in 3 minutes 40 seconds. Hammer got back on track later that year at Pride's first European show, Bushido Europe Rotterdam Rumble, by submitting Milko Vorn via arm triangle choke in less than a minute.
At the same time, a young fighter named Mauricio Shogun Hua made a worldwide splash on the MMA world. Training with the famed Chute Box Academy from Curitiba, Brazil, Shogun entered the Pride 2005 middleweight tournament as an underdog. He shocked the world by defeating Quentin Rampage Jackson, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, Alistair Overeem, and Ricardo Arona to win the tournament. He was named Sherdog's Fighter of the Year.
Now 41 years old, Mark had the feeling Pride was setting him up to lose to their bright young star. But they made the mistake of giving him 3 months' notice to prepare.
They offered me the fight like 3 months prior, and I was like, well, hell yeah. They really just thought I was completely washed up and that Shogun Hua could whoop my ass. I said, okay, you guys fucked up because of the last fight on my contract with Pride. You're giving me 3 months? He's a young kid. He's weak as fuck. I'm a gorilla. And you're giving me 3 months? You guys fucked up.
In a battle of Grand Prix winners, Mark faced Shogun at Pride 31. Mark was tired of losing and didn't want to be a stepping stone for anyone. With the extra time to prepare, Mark refined his diet and training, and actually came to the fight 2 pounds less than Shogun.
What followed was one of the most infamous events in MMA history. The action was brief, with Coleman taking Shogun down and defending his submission attempts. Coleman took Shogun down off a scramble, and Shogun put his hand down to brace his fall. On impact, his elbow twisted awkwardly and he yelled in pain. The ref immediately jumped in to stop the fight. Coleman was confused and tried to push the ref away, but realized what was happening and got up.
People want to say luck. Well, they're crazy. It wasn't luck to me. I created that luck, man. He posted his fucking arm wrong and it broke. That's his fault. I made him break his arm by the way I took him down. I was ready to win that fight that night no matter what. If he wouldn't have broke his arm then, he would have broke something later.
Mauricio's brother, Murillo Ninja Hua, jumped into the cage and started screaming at Mark. Then, all hell broke loose. Chute Box teammate and current middleweight champion Vanderlei Silva jumped into the ring, and Mark's teammate Phil Baroni took him down. A brawl ensued, with the entire ring being filled with Chute Box, Hammer House, and Pride security. When the dust settled, Mark was awarded the victory. It was insane, but it could have been a lot worse. Or better, depending on your perspective. Wes Sims explains.
Like Mark said, it was probably a blessing didn't go, because I didn't make it, neither did Hinkle, and I mean, man, if we would have had much more ammo over there, it could have got real ugly. Because, I mean, it was only Mark and Baroni. Mark's dad was there, and Mark wanted to keep him out of the ring, keep him out of trouble. So, if we would have had the whole crew there, I think it would have been something people would talk about for a long time.
Mark had no ill will towards Chute Box. He recognized their team was just like Hammer House, a family that watches each other's backs. Although Mark tried to apologize to the team backstage, they refused his apology. Wes wasn't surprised.
I don't personally think that they're capable of letting things just blow over. I mean, we haven't ran into them since, I don't think. I mean, I don't think Mark's ran into Vanderlei, but...
The effect of the brawl was far-reaching. Branden Lee Hinkle was living in Brazil at the time.
That's what he said. He called me. He got a hold of Tammy. He said, hey, watch your back down there. And I go, what happened? Because there's no internet or anything. I was just like, and he just kind of explained it to me. And I stayed down for who knows how long I stayed after. I was down here for a while. The magazine came out and it said, Vanderlei said, I want to send Coleman back to the ISS, which is like the Social Security line. And Coleman's like, that motherfucker, I stamped on his dude. So that was another time he wasn't in my corner. That wasn't his corner.
That was the last fight on Mark's Pride contract. They thought he was washed up and tried to use his name to promote Shogun. Now he was in the power position.
And then I beat Shogun. They didn't offer me any cash. I said, fuck you guys. I said, fuck your offer. And guess what? When I beat Shogun, I'm going to be a free agent. And guess what? Dana White is going to want to steal me back because you guys got a show coming up. Your first show in America's coming up. And guess what? I just changed you guys' plans because now the Hammer's back and you're going to need me in that show in America, which they did. I was the only guy that had to fight Fedor with a big enough name. You know what I mean? Because Josh Barnett they had a Grand Prix going on too, so they couldn't use those guys. So, yes, they needed me. And all of a sudden, Dana White calls me up and he wants to steal me, which I was all for going back to the UFC. But he offers me a 3-fight deal. Pride had to call me, and their first offer I just kind of chuckled at. I said, we'll see you later, guys. You know,
had them. I had them by the balls for once, man. They needed me bad, and I just beat Shogun, and I was back in the spotlight. Finally, I hired some managers to handle this, and they went way up. Their number was the biggest paycheck I ever got.
Mark's final Pride appearance was at Pride 32, the real deal. His opponent would be a rematch against the current heavyweight champion, Fedor Emelianenko. Being on U.S. soil, the fight had to be held under the unified rule set, like UFC bouts. Each fight would be 3 5-minute rounds, 10-point must system for judging, no knees to a rounded opponent, and of course, no stomps or soccer kicks.
For the entire round, Fedor kept stuffing Mark's takedown attempts, peppering his face with shots. Mark's eye was closed, and he had a cut over his forehead, prompting the doctor to check on him. The fight continued to the second round, where Mark finally got Fedor to the ground. Mark landed some body shots, but ultimately, the Russian swiveled his hips and submitted Coleman with an armbar.
After the fight was over, Pride staff brought Coleman's 2 young daughters to the ring. They were backstage, and Coleman agreed to have them join him in the ring, if he was okay. Coleman's face showed more damage than any of his other bouts, and he lost. Yet Pride still put McKenzie and Morgan in the ring. It was a surprise to Mark, who had to quickly shift from fighter mode to father mode. His daughters looked terrified. Mark unfairly caught a lot of heat for this, but had nothing to do with him.
As fierce a competitor as Mark was in the ring, he was just as proud and passionate as a father. Dedicating fights to his daughters was a regular occurrence for him. Throughout his career, he stayed home in Ohio to be with his family, rather than taking fight camps elsewhere. Watching his children grow up was something he wouldn't trade for anything. In March of 2007, Zuffa Entertainment, the parent company of the UFC, purchased Pride from DreamStage Entertainment. They proceeded to fold the organization and retain many of the fighters' contracts.
A year later, UFC 82 took place at Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio. This event would unify the Pride and UFC championship belts, with the main event featuring Anderson Silva versus Dan Henderson. Prior to that bout, in front of his hometown, it was announced that Mark Coleman would be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. He was the 5th inductee. Coleman announced he was not retiring, and would return to the octagon to face Brock Lesnar at UFC 87. Mark injured his knee training for the bout, and had to pull out.
Mark made his light heavyweight debut against Hua at UFC 93. The event took place on January 17, 2009, in Dublin, Ireland. Mark came into this fight prepared and in shape. Most fans remember this fight was a disappointing performance for Shogun, but as they say, it takes 2 to tango. Mark's patented aggressive wrestling style took Shogun to the limit. Mark was able to utilize 2 things he wasn't able to in Japan: elbows and the cage. He won the second round, in fact, and it was anybody's fight going into the third. The Hammer controlled most of the third, but with a minute to go, the action was stood back up when Hua threw an illegal knee attack. Once on their feet, Hua finished Coleman with a 4-piece combination. It was a great fight, and an amazing performance by Coleman, and was awarded Fight of the Night honors. At 44 years old, Mark looked ageless.
It looked like I was going to get killed, but then if you look the second time, guess who's coming back? I came back. Dave Meltzer said after this fight, Jesus, he goes, fatigue makes cowards out of everyone. He said somebody must have forgot to tell Coleman.
That summer, Mark took on Stephan Bonnar at the historic UFC 100 event. This fight was billed as old school versus new school. Bonnar helped put UFC on the map with his historic fight with Forrest Griffin. Although he lost that bout, he was very much a contemporary fan favorite. Of course, the Hammer won the UFC 10 and 11 tournaments, and here he was at UFC 100, top billed for the preliminary bouts. For this fight, Mark went out to Vegas to train at Randy Couture's gym, Extreme Couture, most notably with Shawn Tompkins. The 60-day training camp was a great move to prepare for young Bonnar. In the first round, Mark hit a takedown early, but Stephan reversed position. He controlled Mark on top, landing elbows to the side of Mark's head.
In the second, Stephan tried to throw a spinning kick early in the round, but missed and Mark took advantage. Now, on top and half guard, the Hammer went to work. He blasted Bonnar with elbows, busting him open.
Cut him right on the eyebrow. I busted him open with a fucking 2-3 inch fucking cut, and when I seen the blood in his eyes, honestly, I was 44 years old, but turned me back into a 24-year-old, and it just gave me so much energy.
With the crowd chanting his name, Mark continued to work over Stephan with hammer fists. It was a ground and pound clinic from the master of the art, Wes Sims.
Ground and pound is ground and pound. There's no holding back.
It was anyone's fight in the third, clearly in great shape. Mark took Stephan down early in the round, and controlled him from half guard again. He defended a couple of submission attempts, and ended the bout controlling Steffen's back. As the horn sounded, Mark smiled from ear to ear. He won the match by unanimous decision. Looking back on his amazing career, this was Mark's favorite. To get a win against such a tough guy like Bonner, at 44, during such a historic event, was priceless.
Mark would face another ageless warrior in his last bout. Dubbed lovingly by fans, Age in the Cage, Mark would face Randy Couture at UFC 109. This was the first time two Hall of Fame inductees would meet in the cage. With both men coming from a wrestling background, they were both well aware of each other for years. Coleman defeated Randy in a freestyle wrestling match at the 1989 Olympic Festival. Mark's career had come full circle. Randy was originally supposed to face Mark at UFC 17, but fate got in the way, and it took 12 years to finally happen. Both men had a lot of respect for each other. Coleman referred to this as a dream match.
Mark was training with Extreme Couture in Las Vegas, but once the fight was booked, Sean Tompkins left with Mark to train at the Tap Out Gym. Once the bout began, Randy used his boxing to stay at range and not let the fight turn into a wrestling match. Mark could not counter and was choked unconscious in the second round. There was no way Mark Coleman was tapping. Following the loss, Mark was released from the company.
After a lifetime in the wrestling mats, ring and cage, Mark had some wear and tear. He always wanted to be a pro athlete. And knew sacrifice was part of the deal. You have to sacrifice free time, family, and of course, your body. He knew to be a success, you would end up walking crooked. He has a saying, if you're not walking crooked, you probably got your ass kicked. Nick Nutter put it simply.
It's horrible to see Superman on kryptonite, but we're all going to face it.
Mark dealt with injuries his whole career, but as the second UFC run ended, he had a nagging injury that simply wouldn't go away. A bum hip. Before he returned to the UFC, he was dealing with the pain. After his loss to Couture, he hoped rest would allow it to finally heal. He wasn't ready to walk away. He wanted to fight overseas, or at smaller shows, and collect some paychecks. A journeyman tour, so to speak. He loved to fight, and he wasn't ready to give it up. After waiting 3 years of seeing no real improvement, he went to the doctor for a diagnosis.
I waited quite a while because I didn't want to get the MRI because I just kind of had a feeling, you know your body. I just kind of had a feeling the MRI was not going to be good news. And sure enough, when your doctor calls you early in the morning, he don't call to tell you good news usually. He just laid it on the line with me. He said, hey, boy, he said, you're finished.
His hip was gone.
I'm freaking done. My career's over. Yeah, I was 45 years old, but I wasn't ready to quit. Fighters are never ready to quit. Where a lot of us are very much the same. Nobody wants to quit. Everybody tells people to quit. Well, guess what? A lot of fighters that are coaches, well, they know good and well they didn't quit until they had to.
The initial surgery went fantastic, and Mark was able to walk the same day. The caveat was that it was a temporary hip, and he wasn't allowed to have full range of motion. He needed physical therapy.
Then B.J. Penn called. He wanted him to be his wrestling coach for the Ultimate Fighter 19, Penn vs. Edgar. It was a Friday. He asked, can you be on a plane Monday? The Hammer didn't hesitate.
Well, I felt comfortable as soon as I walked into the gym because I was worried. I was nervous. And I walked into the doors at the Performance Center, and I seen all the guys were up there, everybody standing around. It was day one. And I looked up at the wall, and there's a huge picture of me on the Hall of Fame wall. And all of a sudden, yes, it just fucking, that picture kind of like just zapped into me. And all of a sudden, I just stood upright and realized, well, hell, this is where I belong.
Initially, Mark was just going to coach and sit on the sidelines. No need to get crazy. The doctors wouldn't want him grappling with these young bucks. The Hammer just couldn't help himself. He was a living legend, an NCAA national champion, an Olympian. He was a champion and he coached champions. Most importantly, he was a doer, not a shower. He had to show these boys these moves could work. It didn't take long for Mark to get his hands dirty. He loved every second of it, and his hip held up.
After the show, things got progressively worse. The hip started to pop out regularly, seemingly every week. Mark lived in constant pain, or the fear that it would all of a sudden come back. He finally went back to the doctor. The doctor decided to not replace the whole hip like he did 2 years ago, but replace the socket with a bigger one. When he cut Mark open, he found a massive infection. Basically, staph permeated the whole area. The infection made him sepsis, and his body was eating itself, reducing his muscles.
He had to clear up his infection before moving forward with the surgery. He was bedridden. The medical bills were piling up, and without insurance and savings, Mark was struggling to pay.
When you're in there, you're fighting everything. You're on top of the mountain. Everybody's looking at you. And when it's over, it really is over, because there's nothing that can compare to that level of intensity. So everything you do, you feel like a failure at. You feel like you're not at that level, you know? I mean, Mark's example, which I've said to him, which is this: at 31 years old, he was the UFC heavyweight champ. The highest you could be in the sport. I mean, top of the mountain. The only place to go is down from there. So, if you peak and you hit the greatest moment in your life at 31 years old, where are you going to go from there? You know? I mean, a lot of guys are used by the sport, and when their time's over, and their time's up, they're done.
Hammerhouse member Wes Sims took matters into his own hands.
But he didn't have nothing, and I'll tell you, he had, and he's too humble to just come out and say it, but he's lost his house. He really doesn't have much left. He's living at a buddy's in the basement, and he doesn't have much. When the hip is infected, and he didn't have insurance. I mean, he had insurance, but he didn't have insurance that would cover everything. I thought, let's reach out and see if the fans would help him. And a lot of them did. It did. It helped him out a lot.
Knowing he'd be too proud to allow it, Wes secretly posted Mark's situation on GoFundMe.com. The legend needed help, and the MMA community stepped up, raising $45,000. Mark was humbled when he found out.
Now, the surgery's behind him, and things are going well. The Hammer's starting to make a name for himself on social media, predicting fights, telling stories, and interacting with fans. He moves a bit slower now, saving his energy to keep up with his 4-year-old daughter, Skylar. Being a father outweighs any championships in his mind. Mackenzie and Morgan are off to college, but he sees them when he can. It's nice for Nick to see that side of him.
Just recently, let's say in March, I got to see him with his 2 daughters, just being a normal person and a dad, which, to Coleman is Superman. Superman's not normal. He doesn't hang out. But it was nice to see him being a dad and being a family person, where I never looked at him as like a dad. I always looked at him as like an ass beater.
His legacy is cemented in stone. He is the godfather of ground and pound, a strategy that continues to be viable today. His success paved the way for wrestlers in mixed martial arts, and today, the sport is dominated by them. Before Matt Hughes, GSP, and Khabib, you had Mark Coleman, a champion, a Hall of Famer, and father.
Like what you just heard? Check us out on Twitter and Instagram @MMATrueFan. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Special thanks to Mark Coleman, Russ Hellickson, John McCarthy, Ricco Rodriguez, Wes Sims, Nick Nutter, Don Frye, and Branden Lee Hinkle. Music by With Lions Productions. Artwork by Mike Zandt.